Hey DJ TechTools, Ean Golden here. We've been shooting a lot of videos here for a long time. And as I was dusting off a lot of old gear, I thought, wouldn't it be cool to share the story of exactly how we got here? The total history of DJ TechTools. Well, today I'm going to take you down memory lane, take myself down memory lane, and do exactly that, and share with you the complete history of DJ TechTools. It all got started with this record. Believe it or not, yes, I used to be a raver in the 90s, probably like a lot of you. After a few days of playing around with records, I was hooked. I sold all my guitars and started becoming a DJ. Fortunately for me, I hit the market at just the right time and became really successful as a deep house DJ in the early and late 90s using records. All this changed in 2001, however, when that whole movement stopped and a friend started playing with Final Scratch. This is one of the first Final Scratch records from 2002. A friend suggested to me that instead of playing with records, I should start exploring Final Scratch so I could use MP3s to play a lot of different music, which would open up different styles of gigs. At first I said, no way, Jose. There's absolutely no chance I'm going to give up my beloved records and start DJing with a computer. Yes, even I was one of those people in the early days. Fortunately for me, I eventually relented. But instead of adopting Final Scratch, I started using an early software called Traktor. Now, early in Traktor's history, you couldn't control it using records. You could only control records with Final Scratch. But Traktor did offer Midi control. So I got myself one of the only compact Midi controllers out there at the time, the M-Audio Oxygen 8. And this is actually the original one right here. It's been modified quite a bit, but I taught myself how to DJ using only a Midi controller and a laptop. So I used to roll up to gigs and I'd put the Midi controller on the right turntable with a little piece of foam, and I'd put another piece of foam in my laptop on the left turntable and mix on the mixer using a little 2-channel sound card. This was 2002, 2003, and needless to say, it was not a very popular idea. Most people were very against it and thought it was total heresy. But the things I was able to do with Midi controllers, things like setting loops and filtering out parts of the songs and using these keys to jump between the tracks and jump around in cue points, opened up a whole new dimension of DJing and got me really excited again about mixing. So a few years later, things are going really well with this, and I'm doing a show at a big club called Ruby Sky. And I'm mixing on my M-Audio Oxygen 8, and I've connected, because it's MIDI, the Oxygen 8 to the visuals behind me. And so everything I'm doing in Traktor is reflected in real time in this club. And somebody from Apple Computers was there. And they said, wow, this is really cool. You should come work with us on this new project that we're doing, which would become Quartz Composer and the 3D engine that made all of the graphics inside of OS X possible. Well, I wasn't much of a developer, so I couldn't help them too much, but we did do a really cool project where I mapped everything I did on the controller to 3D objects inside of a Mac. This demo was so cool that they asked me to come on stage and show it at one of the early WWDCs right after Steve Jobs. Fortunately for me, some folks from O'Reilly's Media were in the crowd, and they asked me to write a book. This eventually turned into a column for Remix magazine called The Digital DJ, which I wrote for 3 years. And around 2007, 2008, it became very clear that digital DJing was starting to grow and that this thing needed to go global. So I turned my column into a blog and threw it on the internet and called it DJ TechTools. First couple months were real slow, I gotta be honest. They weren't terribly busy. But one thing changed all that. Finally, a company saw that DJing with controllers could actually be something cool and released the first serious DJ controller for the world. And that, of course, was Vestax with the VCI 100. So I got one of the very first VCI 100s from Vestax and started reviewing it for Remix Magazine. I was playing around with it, really enjoying it, but discovered that the buttons were just too stiff. Remember, I had been used to the tactile action of the Oxygen 8. I've been playing around with cue points, and man, these keys feel amazing. So switching over to these hard, not tactile buttons was just not fun. And so I looked at the controller and I opened it up and I realized, wow, there's a lot of space inside where these hard buttons are. And instead of returning my review unit, I took it to my local machine shop and chopped 8 holes in the top sheet. Thank you, Vestax. Sorry, Vestax. They never got their review unit back, but I posted a video of myself and these buttons in the controller online. Earlier, I had been talking to Moldover about this idea of controllerism. I had been playing with my controller, he was playing with his, and so I put a video on about controllerism and me doing cue point juggling with these arcade buttons. Well, it's safe to say that that video and this mod kicked it all off. Gizmodo posted it, Engadget posted it, and all of you who are still possibly out there today and are fans of the site may have seen those first videos and thought, that's what I want to do. DJing with buttons and jumping around, this is something that I could get into. It was the intersection of gaming, music, and technology that got everyone, including myself, so excited. After posting that video, the website started to do really well, and DJ TechTools was off. One of the first things that happened, though, was a gentleman from LA asked me to make one of these controllers for him too. So I did. I improved my design, I cut the buttons out a little bit better, and this is the very controller itself. Not only did I make him one, but I made another one for myself and a third one for eBay. So I stuck this controller on eBay just to see how much would someone pay for it. It went for $1,200, which was more than double the price of the original VCI 100. Wow, I thought, that's something. Not only do people love DJ TechTools, but they also want the gear that I want. Maybe we should make more gear. And this is where we really turned things over into hyperdrive. So I went to Vestax, the same people whose demo unit I never sent back, and I said, listen, guys, your VCI 100 is great, but I can make it a lot better. I've remapped it and made a special design that turns your relatively normal controller into a supercharged digital DJ machine. And they said, okay, great. I said, listen, make me some controllers of my own and I will sell them on the internet directly to my fans. Toshi at Vestax said, okay, how many do you want? 5, 10? I said, nope, give me 100. Give me 100 controllers. And so, even though they thought we would never sell them, they did. They made me 100 of these Vestax VCI 100 Ean Golden editions. And this is one of the original 100. And it introduced a lot of really cool concepts that clearly people liked, because when they went on sale, they sold out in under 2 hours. These were exciting times. I personally packed and shipped every single one of those controllers by myself with my girlfriend in my apartment in San Francisco, and continued to write on DJ TechTools. So around this time, something really important happened. People in the community started asking me for a forum. They said, hey, we not only want to read the articles you're posting, but we'd also like to post things on our own and start creating some real community amongst ourselves. Fortunately, I listened and turned the forum over to a really important person named Bento-san, who was one of the first 100 people to start posting on the DJ TechTools forum, which was a really important place for the further developments of DJ TechTools. One of the very first members of the forum, named Midi Fiddler, had saw me post a video about my DJ 101 DIY controller. And of course, he saw the VCI 100 Arcade Edition. And because he was an electrical engineer, started his own design of a little MIDI controller with 16 arcade buttons and 2 joysticks that he called the MIDI Fighter. He sent me an email and said, hey, would you like one of my MIDI fighters? Because if I'm going to make one, I might as well make 10. I said, absolutely, and fortunately, he sent me one. This controller was so cool that I asked him, how could we make this? Is there any way we could make a MIDI controller like this so other people could get one more affordably? Fortunately, he found a way to do it, and we made the very first MIDI Fighter DIY. Using all off-the-shelf components and a totally DIY assembly, we would ship people from my house in San Francisco 16 arcade buttons, a PCB that him and his friends had soldered together in New Zealand, and the acrylic that we had cut at a nearby acrylic shop. And people would put it all together and make their very own DIY MIDI controller that was built by pretty much 2 guys on either ends of the world that had never met each other before. This was a really cool project, and because of the innovation that Michael did, it was possible for people to build a MIDI controller for under a couple $100 and do it completely customized. The MIDI DIY was rad and did very well for us and is still a beloved controller around the world. About the same time, because of the success of the VCI 100, Native Instruments came to me and said, hey, would you like to help in the design of our first DJ MIDI controller? Of course I would. So I went to Berlin for 6 months and started doing different designs on what a MIDI controller should be like and what my dream controller would feel like. And I created all the specifications, ended up with the following drawing. You'll see it right here. This is the final drawing that I came up after months and months of tooling around on exactly how the button should feel, how big the jog wheel should be, what the appropriate spacing would be. And that design ended up, of course, first in the S4. Native Instruments added 2 extra channels, cleaned up the center panel, and released the S4, which is a beautiful controller and works amazingly. Later, of course, they used the same design elements, chopped it down a little bit, and created the S2. And I'm really proud to have worked with all the talented engineers and folks over at Native to have helped produce those 2 amazing, amazing products. So around the same time, I started trying to convince my turntablist friends, remember the guys who were back still on Final Scratch. By this time, I think they were starting to use Serato because Serato had shown up. But they were not touching MIDI controllers. And I thought, well, the only way I'm going to get these guys to use a MIDI controller is if we actually put one on their beloved turntables, because that's the only place that they would actually use something. So I worked up my first little cardboard prototype design. It had an extruded center to fit in the 45 adapter hole of the MK1200 Techniques turntable. The only thing that you could guarantee would be in a DJ booth at that time. And I took it around and I stuck it on people's turntables and I said, hey, if this lived here and it would allow you to control your cue points, would you use it? Most people told me no. They thought I was a little bit crazy. Fortunately, I didn't listen. I shopped around and found a company who was willing to build it. Novation was just that company, and together we made this first printed prototype of what would become the Dicer. They made a few improvements. As you can see, they went from square buttons to round buttons, and they added this dice concept with 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 dice-styled markings on the buttons. Really good stuff, and they managed to make them for under $100, and it became one of the best-selling MIDI controllers for turntable DJs. Still used by people like Jazzy Jeff and all kinds of guys today. Super proud of being a part of that product and glad that it went out in the world. And yes, by the way, those guys who said, we'll never use it, used it for years. Later on, we'd finally come back to Vestax and we made the VCI 400 Ean Golden edition. The big, bad, badass brother of the VCI 100. Took all the crazy stuff that I built into that controller and made it even crazier. And this one did really well for us, and I'm still very proud of how beautiful it is. Again, crowdsourced from the community. There was a really great member of the community who did the design on this, and also a number of people, including Flash Flooder Chris Lim, who worked on the mappings and made the mappings really amazing, and still a beloved and used controller today, even though Vestax is no longer with us and no longer producing controllers. So somewhere around this time, now my timeline here is a little fuzzy, I'm jumping forward, I'm jumping back. The Midi Fighter DIY was beloved, but we wanted to have it reach more people and give people a controller that was already built. So we went back to the drawing board and we made our first totally complete controller from scratch. And that would be the Midi Fighter 3D, which allowed you to move and control the sound with motion. It tracks left axis, right axis, twisting, all kinds of great stuff. This controller is still in production today and is used by a lot of people, especially people who are controlling lighting rigs like Skrillex and other big DJs around the world are using this to control their lighting rigs. Lots of finger drumming, of course. Mad Zach started inventing the whole concept of finger drumming with this controller, which we just love. And you can still get one of these today, but it didn't have the customization. So we introduced the Midi Fighter Spectra, where we brought back the customization of the DIY in a more polished controller. Here's one that had a wood top, and you could choose the color of the sides, the top, and the buttons. That's the Midi Fighter Spectra. Most recently, of course, we finally introduced the knob version of the Midi Fighter, the Midi Fighter Twister. This was a really cool project because it was the first project where we completely went back to the community and did a design contest and allowed members of the community to design our next controller. This is what they came up with. They actually came up with over 400 amazing designs. It was incredibly difficult to pick which one. Here's a photo of Michael and I standing in front of the board, looking at all the different design options, trying to figure out what people really wanted and what controller we should build. In the end, one of the most simple was also the most popular. It was just 16 encoders, just like the Midi Fighter, and that's what we ended up making. And just like the original poster, we called it the Twister. It's still made today, and it's a controller that I use in my sets and absolutely love. Around the same time, I noticed that there had never been any innovation around knobs on DJ gear. They were always hard and plasticky and pretty boring. So we went to town on the knob and said, hey, if we were going to engineer this thing from scratch, what would it look like? And we came up with Chroma Caps, a line of knobs that come in different colors and have specifically been designed for performance. Things like double injected rubber exteriors, soft pointers that don't dig into your fingers, really grippable widths, and wider, fatter options as well for those that really want to crank and get into their effects. It was shortly after that we decided, well, probably need a better USB cable. We had made a Pro USB cable for a while that was really good. It had some double ferrites, good shielding, so sound cards wouldn't drop out as much, and people loved it. We added a colored version called Chroma cables. They come in a whole bunch of different colors, and those, of course, are still sold today, and I just love these. Especially love having a red Chroma cable for my sound card, so I make sure that I don't unplug that. So that's pretty much it, folks. That is the history of DJ TechTools up until today. It's been a really, really fun 8-year journey. And of course, we absolutely wouldn't be here without every single one of you and the DJ TechTools community, which has consistently shaped and made decisions about where we've gone. The whole site was bootstrapped from scratch with no money from day one. And the only way that was possible was because of volunteers and people that came forward and said, hey, I'm good at engineering. Can I help you build a controller? Or, hey, I can do some web stuff. Can I help you build a website? Our very first logo, and still our logo today, was created by you guys in the community. We held a contest, and a lot of people created great logos, and one stuck, and it's our logo today. So I hope we can keep that energy and that ethos alive for another 8 years into the future, and I'm excited to see what you ask for and what we create together on DJTechTools.com.